The Two Medicine Country doesn't announce itself. It's just there, wide and cold and indifferent to whether you understand it or not. The buttes rise out of the frozen grass like the spine of something ancient that forgot to finish dying. And in January of 1877, a man named Calhoun Redd drove his supply wagon into the small, struggling settlement of Dellhaven, with 40 pounds of seed corn, 2 cases of hymnals, a mule named Dempsey, and the comfortable certainty that he had, in his 60 years on this earth, done enough good to be left alone by his conscience. Dempsey's hooves made almost no sound on the frozen mud. The town wasn't awake yet. The mission church sat at the west end of the main street, pine frame, unfinished south wall, stuffed with burlap and dried grass against the cold. And the single iron bell hung in its tower without ringing because no one had arrived to ring it. Calhoun didn't ring it either. He unhitched Dempsey at the livery post, spread a blanket over the mule's back, and went to look for coffee. He'd been riding this circuit for 11 years, Fort Benton to Dellhaven to the smaller outposts north along the Marias River and back again 4 times a year, carrying Bibles and seed and tinned goods and the occasional letter that someone had paid him a dime to deliver. He was liked wherever he went. He had mastered the particular art of caring about people from a careful, comfortable distance, close enough to feel useful, far enough not to be changed by it. He knew the names of most people's horses. He'd sat with dying men and spoken the right words over them, and the words had helped, and that was real. He'd given seed corn to a Métis family outside of Big Sandy during a bad summer, and they'd made it through. He was not a dishonest man. He was not a cruel one. He just had a talent for looking at the things he didn't want to see, and then looking somewhere else.
I hear you.
The boarding house was run by Orla Fitch, a woman built like a pine tree, with hands that could have wrung a saddle dry, and a voice that never rose and never needed to. She poured him coffee without being asked, set a plate of yesterday's biscuits in front of him, and sat down across from him to talk about the weather, because the weather was, in Dellhaven in January, the main thing happening.
It's a killing cold this year, Reverend. Not the dramatic kind, just
The kind that stays.
She said it matter-of-factly, the way you say a thing you've already made your peace with. She refilled her own cup and looked out the frost-edged window at the street.
some things just don't survive a cold like this. Better to know it early.
I asked about the church roof. Does it need repairs?
She meant the barley crop she tried to overwinter. She meant the plum tree her husband had planted before he died, which had frozen to the root the previous February. She didn't mean anything else by it. But Calhoun's eyes drifted, just for a moment, toward the ridge east of town. That long limestone spine where he knew, without having been told explicitly, that there was a camp. A woman. A Blackfoot widow whose husband had fallen the previous spring, in circumstances the town described one way, and the woman, no doubt, described another. He looked away. He finished his biscuit. He asked Orla about the church roof. He met Wendell Crabb at the livery, not by arrangement, but by the small, unavoidable geometry of a town with only 200 yards of Main Street. Crabb was a trim man in his 40s, clean-shaved, even in January, which took discipline Calhoun had always found faintly suspicious. He had the squared-off certainty of a man who has signed enough papers that he stopped wondering whether the papers were right.
ROFH season for travel.
The Lord doesn't schedule around them. We never With all due respect, Calhoun, the paperwork doesn't seem to allow
Crabb smiled at that. The polite smile of a man who finds faith amusing in exactly the way you find a child's drawing amusing. Sweet, harmless, easily moved aside.
Only
Calhoun kept his face even. Crab kept going.
Shelter, food, that kind of thing.
It was a threat wrapped in bureaucracy, which was Crab's preferred method. Plausible, polite, and absolutely clear. Calhoun spent that afternoon in the mission church alone. The unfinished south wall let the cold seep through in thin fingers, and the iron bell overhead gave its flat, slightly off ring when the wind nudged it. He sat in the first pew and tried to pray, which he had not found genuinely difficult in 11 years of circuit riding, but which was, today, surprisingly hard to begin. He listed his reasons. He was a single man with a mule and a wagon. He had no authority here. Crab held the land office and the federal paperwork and the ear of the territorial governor's office. Whatever had happened to Otokai was a settled matter in the eyes of the law. There were people on this circuit who needed the seed corn he was carrying, and if his paperwork was tied up, he couldn't deliver it. And wasn't that a harm too? These were not dishonest reasons. They were not even wrong. And every single one of them was a way of looking somewhere else. He slept that night in a wagon, under 3 blankets and a tarpaulin, and he told himself the cold was why he couldn't settle. He woke at the gray edge of dawn to find Dempsey standing very still. Not the startled stillness of a threatened animal, but the patient stillness of a horse, who recognizes that another creature is near and has decided that creature means no harm. Calhoun sat up in his blankets and looked over the wagon rail. She was standing 3 feet from the wagon wheel. A woman, perhaps 35 years old, dark hair braided, wearing a blanket wrapped over a worn hide coat that was not enough for what this January was doing to the air. Her lips had the white-edged cracking of someone who had spent too many nights without adequate shelter. She held a small pouch in one hand. Beadwork, red and black, the stitching so precise it was almost shocking in that gray, cold morning. She was not begging. Her posture didn't hold a single angle of supplication. She was there to conduct a transaction.
I need salt. I have DHIS to trade.
She held out the beadwork pouch. It was worth 10 times the salt. She knew that. He knew that. The knowing sat between them in the cold air. Calhoun Redd looked at the cracked skin around her mouth. He looked at the pouch. He looked at the mule, who was still standing with that patient, unhurried stillness. And then he reached past the salt. He lifted the tarpaulin and opened the wagon. She didn't come inside easily, not into the mission church, not even into the lee of the wagon out of the wind. She stood in the doorway of the unfinished building with the wariness of someone who has learned that warmth offered quickly is often warmth withdrawn the same way. Calhoun didn't press her. He put the salt on the wagon gate and set the biscuit tin next to it, and went to start a fire in the church's iron stove, and let her make her own choices about proximity. She made them slowly. By mid-morning, she was sitting on the end of the front pew with her hands wrapped around a tin cup of hot water. There was no tea, but hot water is not nothing in January. And Calhoun was splitting firewood outside and pretending not to listen. She talked about Otokai the way you talk about someone when you've been carrying them alone for a long time and have finally found a space where setting them down won't get you in trouble. Not with tears. She was long past tears, or at least past the kind that fall.
He told me I would be
But
safe
with the
here.
specific, deliberate weight
Lied.
of someone choosing their words because they matter.
He was good at horses. That's the
You
first
were the
thing.
one who held
Better
me
than
down.
anyone I ever saw. He could read what they were thinking before they knew it themselves. He used to say a horse was just a four-legged prayer. He wasn't a praying man, but he said that.
Otokai is my
Calhoun kept
brother.
splitting wood. He didn't trust himself to speak. He was afraid anything he said would be the wrong kind of thing. The comforting, distant, pastoral kind that doesn't cost the person saying it anything at all.
He went to the boundary line in April because the soldiers had drawn a new line, 6 miles east of where the agreement said. They sent a man to tell us. My husband went to ask them to show him the paper with the new line.
There was a long quiet after that.
He raised his hands, the way you do when you want someone to see that you're not carrying anything dangerous. The young soldier, he didn't know that gesture, or he did know it, and he was frightened anyway. I don't know which.
She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. What Crabbe had told the town was different. What Crabbe had told the town was the story that made the paperwork easier. And Calhoun had heard that story third hand, and had not asked questions because the questions would have required going to the ridge and talking to the woman. And he had reasons, good, logical, defensible reasons, not to do that. He set the axe down and came inside. The days that followed had the quality of something not quite real. A parenthesis between the thing that had been and the thing that was about to happen. Calhoun brought Waka food from his supply wagon. Salt, dried meat, a tin of preserved apples he'd been saving for himself. Halvor Breck at the livery said nothing about the extra armload of hay he left by the mission door each morning. Not a word. Just left it there and walked away. The town noticed. The town always notices. But noticing and acting are different countries, and most of Dellhaven was camped on the side of the border that cost less. It was Waka who suggested the ridge, not as an outing, as an explanation. She had been carrying the medicine bundle when she arrived, wrapped in red wool over bone and feather, hung from the mission's center beam now with a cord of twisted sinew. Calhoun had not asked about it because it was hers, and because he sensed the question required more preparedness than he currently had. She said, "I want to show you where he is, so you understand why I don't leave." The ridge was everything Dellhaven was not. The town was compressed, provisional, built from anxiety and compromise. The ridge was enormous. The limestone ran east-west for 3 miles, and you could see the Two Medicine River drainage from up there, silver gray and frozen, the whole vast country laid out below like something a person might spend a lifetime trying to understand and still fall short. The Blackfoot had been burying their dead here for longer than Dellhaven had existed, longer than the territorial government's idea of Montana had existed, longer probably than a lot of ideas that people in offices in Washington considered permanent. Waka stopped at a place marked with 3 stones in a line and a single eagle feather anchored beneath the middle stone. She said his name. Otokai. She said it again. Otokai. And then a third time. The way you say something when you want the land itself to remember it. Otokai. The wind went across the ridge, and neither of them spoke for a long time. Calhoun didn't know what to do with his hands. He settled for putting them in his pockets and standing still and letting the weight of the place rest on him the way it deserved to.
His father gave him the medicine bundle, and his father's father gave it to him. They did not give it because they believed the world was good. They gave it so the next person would know that someone before them had carried something worth carrying.
Below them, on the main street, Calhoun could just make out Crabbe's land office with its new lumber. He could see Orla Fitch's boarding house. He could see his own wagon parked at the mission. He thought about what it meant to carry something worth carrying. And he thought about what it meant when you set it down, because carrying it became inconvenient. Crabbe moved on a Thursday. He came with a written document, territorial order, official seal, county clerk's signature, and he read it in front of the boarding house where enough people were passing to make it public. He spoke clearly and without apparent malice, the way a man reads a weather report. The people on the main street of Dellhaven were not bad people. They were tired people, frightened people, people holding on to things by their fingernails who couldn't afford to pick up anything new. Not one of them stepped forward. Calhoun was standing on the porch of the mission. He heard every word. He felt the moment, felt its edges, the specific shape of it. The fact that this was exactly the kind of moment where a man's choices become the story that gets told about him. He didn't step forward either. He found her that evening at the lean-to, packing what she had with the neat, minimal efficiency of someone who has done this before, more than once. She folded the hide blanket with the particular care of someone handling something that has kept them alive, and she set it against the willow pole frame, and she didn't look up when Calhoun arrived.
I'm sorry.
She kept packing.
I never meant for this to happen. I am sorry, Wagon.
Not cold, not angry, just as if she'd already received the apology and processed it and moved on. The way you process something you expected. Calhoun opened his mouth. He closed it again. She went back to folding. The lean-to fire pit had gone out. The medicine bundle still hung from the center pole. She hadn't taken it down yet. The door of the lean-to was a hanging piece of hide. When Calhoun turned to walk away, it fell back into place behind him, and the sound it made was almost nothing. Almost nothing at all.
I never meant to cause you this much pain.
He didn't sleep that night. He went back to the mission church, and he sat in the dark in the first pew, and
I expected this.
he didn't try to pray. Because he had enough honesty left to know that what he wanted wasn't guidance. It was permission. Permission to let this be someone else's problem. Permission to finish his circuit and deliver his seed corn and feel like a decent man on the ride home.
You speak the truth. There's not a thing I can say against it.
The unfinished south wall breathed cold air through its stuffing of burlap and grass. The iron bell shifted overhead and rang its flat, incomplete note and went silent. He thought about the ridge, about the 3 stones and the eagle feather,
That's just math.
and the name said 3 times so the land would remember it. He thought about what Waka had said about the medicine bundle. Not that it was sacred, though it was, but that it was carried so the next person would know someone before them had carried something worth carrying. He thought about what story would be told about Calhoun Redd after he was gone, and whether anyone would hang anything of his from a pole and say his name 3 times. He thought about Orla Fitch saying some things don't survive a cold like this. He thought about what she hadn't meant by it. He was still there when the gray began to come up at the east window, and by the time the gray had shaded toward the first pale blue of pre-dawn, he had stopped looking for permission and started looking for a place to begin. He went to Halvor Breck. Not to the town council, not to Orla Fitch, not to anyone who would want to debate the matter. He went to the quiet Norwegian man who had left extra hay by the mission door every morning for a week without being asked and without explanation. Halvor was already up, working a stiff leather harness with neat oil in the lamplight of the livery.
Alvar, it's time to talk about the preacher, though. He's here already? What does he want? He knows what we've been hiding. I'm going to drive the supply wagon out
Halvor
to the
kept
south
working the
end of
leather.
light.
He didn't answer right away.
Your name is Halvor Breck.
Another silence. The oil worked into the leather with slow, patient strokes.
Hope is a good start, Calhoun.
The sun came over the ridge at 7:14 in the morning, which, in January, meant the main street of Dellhaven was already getting its thin, flat winter light when Calhoun Redd drove his supply wagon back through it toward the South Butte. The wagon was loaded, not for departure, but for provision: salt, dried meat, wool blanket rolls, the tin of preserved apples he'd been saving, and the seed corn from Fort Benton that was meant for the spring planting. Halvor Breck walked alongside the wagon. He hadn't asked if Calhoun wanted company, he just walked. Waka had not left yet. She was outside the lean-to when the wagon came over the rise, sitting on a flat stone with the morning light on her face, watching the sun clear the ridge above Otokai's resting place the way Calhoun would think later. You watch something you've done every morning for a long time and intend to keep doing. She looked at the wagon. She looked at Halvor. She looked at Calhoun.
I'm not delivering an apology. I'm delivering what I should have driven out here 3 days ago.
He climbed down from the wagon and began unloading. Not in a hurry, not with the flustered energy of someone trying to undo a mistake all at once. Just steadily. The way you work when you've finally decided what you're working toward. He went back to the main street after. He stopped the wagon in front of Crab's land office, and he said what he needed to say in a voice loud enough that the 3 or 4 people on the street could hear it without straining.
The Sorrel Creek Mission will be providing winter supply and shelter to any person on the Two Medicine corridor who needs it.
He said her name on the main street of Dellhaven. Waka. And the name landed in the cold air like a struck match, like a stone dropped into still water, like a bell struck clean. Crab came out of his office. He had his papers, and he had his seal. And he had the impeccable calm of a man who has the law in his pocket and knows it. He cited the territorial order. He cited the census period. He cited 3 separate precedents from federal land management protocol. Calhoun stood in the wagon seat and listened to all of it with the patience of a man who has spent 60 years learning to sit with grief and knows that a man doing paperwork is not the most frightening thing in the world.
Authority of the governor himself. Perhaps this land carries a history even higher.
Crab had no answer for that, not a quick one. In the 2 weeks that followed, 3 other families from the Two Medicine corridor accepted supply from the mission. None of them were Blackfoot. One was a settler family from Nebraska who'd lost 2 of their cattle to the freeze. Another was a Métis trapper and his elderly mother. The third was a family Calhoun couldn't quite categorize, and he'd stopped trying. Orla Fitch brought a pot of boiled mutton stew to the mission on the second Thursday and left it without explanation. She didn't stay. She didn't make a speech about it. She just left the pot. Nobody tightened the bell bolt. Not for almost 2 weeks. Then one morning, Calhoun came out of the mission at dawn and found the mission wall changed. Waka had hung the medicine bundle from a nail above the door. The red wool wrapping, the bone and feather wrapped inside it, Matoki's inheritance, her inheritance, a chain of memory going back to grandfathers whose names the territorial government had no record of and no interest in. She was standing a few yards away, watching him find it. Not smiling exactly, but not without warmth either. Calhoun looked at the bundle for a long moment. The morning light was on it. The Two Medicine country was spread out behind them, pale gold and enormous and indifferent, and somehow, this morning, also not indifferent at all. She wasn't moving into the mission. She had her ways and her place, and the lean-to she'd made her own. She wasn't asking for anything more than what she'd asked for that first dawn at the Wagon. To be met as an equal, to have the transaction conducted honestly, to have her husband's name said out loud in a place where someone else would remember it. Calhoun reached up and touched the bell rope. He'd been meaning to ask someone about that flat, off-note ring for 11 years. But when he pulled the rope, the bell rang clean. One clear, full note across the frozen Two-Medicine country. Across the ridge where Otokai faced the sunrise. Across the main street of Dellhaven where Orla Fitch looked up from her window and couldn't quite name why the sound made her feel the way it did. Halvor Breck had tightened the mounting bolt in the night. He hadn't mentioned it. He never did mention it. The bell rang and the sound went out across all that cold, wide, patient country. The kind of sound that doesn't know anything about federal orders or land agents or the careful, defensible reasons why a man might look the other way. It was just a bell. Just a bell ringing where it had always been meant to ring. And that was enough. It was more than enough. It was exactly enough.